The 19th, Will, please. Imagine me as a young boy. I have some confessions to make to you. When I was at school, and I know we've got some teachers here, so bear with me, I really didn't like teachers. You might find this hard to believe. You know, I really didn't quite fit into the norms of school. Sorry, Jeff, I know you are an anointed teacher. And, you know, I struggled. Surprisingly enough, when I was going through the school, the subject that I struggled most with was German. I know I got kicked out of every German lesson that I ever went to for misbehaving, doing the wrong thing. Now, you'll find this hard to believe looking at me now, I know you're thinking, no, this can't be you, Paul. But I struggled, and my teacher pulled me aside and said, Paul, why won't you learn this German? And I said, one, I don't like Germans. I'm going to say this slowly so people don't hear. We beat them twice in the war. And I'm never going to want to speak to a German. Life goes by. As you know, my punishment of life, because it has rich ironies, doesn't it, life? It bit me so hard I ended up marrying a German teacher. So for 30 years, I've had to eat my own words. Isn't that the way of life, the irony of life? And when I was at school, boy, the thing that I would hate in school was you would sit there and they would say, today we are going to have an exam. Oh, my heart used to sink down with me. I'd start to feel, oh no, here we go. And we'd do the exam and hopefully I'd scrape. In fact, I did quite well because I had a good memory. Not for the fact that I studied, but I was able to remember things, I think. Today we are going to look at an exam that Peter takes on this incredible journey, because I want us to hold the metaphor of journey. Mark, more than any other gospel, is a story of a journey. But unlike the other Gospels, will take us to places that we are unexpected. And even at the end of the journey, we are still invited to journey along. In fact, there is no great resurrection story of Jesus being met in the garden, like in one of the other Gospels, or meeting with the disciples behind locked doors, or going on the road to Emmaus. In fact, at the end of this Gospel, if we want to take what we call the proper ending, all that we are left with is an empty tomb and the invitation to keep journeying. I'll talk more about that as we get towards Easter. But today's story, Peter talks to Jesus, and Jesus asks him the question that I guess he asks every disciple, because Peter stands as like the prototype of discipleship. He is the one that is there that represents our voice, because we get it right and we get it wrong, don't we? And he says to Peter, who do you say I am? Who do you say that I am? And wonderful. Peter turns round and says, what? You are just some bloke that we decided to follow? No, he says, you are the Christ. You are the one. And you'd expect dear old Jesus to sort of pat him on the back. All is done. Because this reminds me of being a young Christian. See, I went many years ago, back in the 70s, when I did have hair, when flares were really in. I went down to a place behind the old Presbyterian church. There was a big hall, probably still there, but I haven't heard John Smith speak. Do you know John Smith? John Smith, the founder of the God Squad. And John preached his heart out. And I reckon if you were not moved by what he said on that evening, you had a stone heart. You had an incapacity to respond emotionally to anything. And like many others, I went forward that night for the first time to receive Christ, to say the name, to get a Bible given to me, and a voucher for a hamburger. Interesting. But today the question is It's actually getting the answer to the exam right, but failing the exam. So he got the question right, yes? When he was asked, "Who do you say I am?" He said, "You are the Christ." Close the Bible, we've confessed Jesus as Lord, and off we go. Finish the story. In fact, we could have our final reading from that gospel today if saying the name is the only thing that matters. We can close the Bible and say, "Hallelujah, we're all saved, we've confessed Christ," and off we go. But you know, this is just the middle of the journey. In our readings from Mark, we've gone from one extent and we've jumped over 8 chapters to this point here. But this is the middle of the gospel. And in many respects, it is the middle of the journey in this gospel. There is still another journey to go. And it says in the scriptures, Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem. And that's not just a geographical location like we have here. It's actually a place where there will be conflict, where there will be struggles, conflict between the religious, the political, and ultimately with the people. Yes, when they turn around and they say, "Not our Messiah, do with him what you want," in that time that we're going to remember over Easter. So we're only halfway through the journey. There is more of the journey to undertake. And if we want to camp on experiences, the Gospel of Mark constantly tells us to get ourselves up, to put our pack on our back, and to keep going. A few weeks ago, we heard the story of Transfiguration, and there's dear old Peter once again saying, "Shall we camp up here, Lord? Shall we park here?" And a second time, in today's story, we can park on this experience of the confession in our mouth. But you see, Jesus requires more of us because the journey is ongoing. And Jesus talks about this journey. You will take up your cross and you will come and follow. Is that just talking to Peter, or is it talking to all disciples down through the ages? Because words are not enough. You remember, some of you, that famous play or musical with Eliza Doolittle in? Yeah, and Dr. Henry Higgins. I can talk like a Londoner because I come from London. I can drop me H's like the best of you. But that story, and at one stage she sings this marvellous song, which is, "Don't give me words, show me." You know that song? Some of you might. If you're a bit younger, stick with his old age. We're still in the 60s, remember. Don't give me words, show me. Showing is the taking up of the cross and following. When you feel like camping on your experience, parking there, we are told, don't. Take up your cross and follow. You see, the exam doesn't stop with just the confession. The exam is, how do we keep going in this journey? This incredible journey. It's a journey that will take us to crucifixion. It will take us into conflict. It will talk about deaths, but it will also talk about resurrections. Each of us experience resurrection in our own life in new and different ways, because Easter is not just the story of one man's death. It is a story of our own confronting of this incredible desire of God to spread good news to all people. And it is in the journeying that we will discover people along the way. And if you are here in Carlton, it might be in the coffee shops or along the street. It might be just down at the corner or in the high-rise flats that we might discover those along the way. And if it's just saying the words, which we do so well in our church and we spend so much time formulating in our liturgy, then we have failed the exam. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, most of you know who he is, a German theologian who was around during the time that the Nazis were in power and spoke out against the Nazis, talked about the fact that we can so easily give in to a cheap grace, one that just requires so little of us, just perhaps even to say the words, although even in that time, saying the words in themselves were quite political. But he said, no, the grace that we have is a costly grace, one that cost of each one of us. And each of us will pay a price in our own ways if we are going to take the words of Jesus and take up our cross and follow along the way. My friends, the journey is underway. We are nowhere near the finish line. In fact, we are closer to the start than the finish. Today we can say all the words that we want, but the truth is in the following. And the following asked us to continue on this journey, and the journey doesn't stop. The journey calls us to continue and follow with all of that burden that is our cross. But then Jesus does have some other things to say later down the track about burdens and yokes and taking things. I'll leave that for another day. My friends, enjoy our journey together as we go towards Easter, but realising this Easter is always followed by another Easter and a continuing journey. May God bless you as you contemplate on these things.